Hey guys, welcome again to the Offshore Diaries. I'm Paulo Santos, your host. Today we have the pleasure of having Chris Borgese join us. I'm going to let Chris talk a lot about his background and different groups that he's with. Full transparency, Chris and I have worked together on several companies and several projects together. We've known each other for, Chris, 15 years now, give or take, at
Yeah,
least, maybe
a
more.
little bit longer.
Worked together on businesses covering real estate, legal, fintech, transportation. I mean, all covering the gamut all around. And Chris has been kind of my sales and communications guru this entire time. And I'm going to let Chris talk about his background a little bit and really talk about what we're talking with the Offshore Diaries about how the VA world is really specific and broad at the same time. And Chris's expertise is in sales and how the VA world in the Philippines and how the sales world in the Philippines are kind of intersecting and at a strange crossroads in many ways. Chris, welcome to the podcast. Can you give us a bit of background, a bit about yourself and how we got here?
Yeah. So Paulo, thanks so much for having me, and happy to share my experiences and a kind of passion project that I'm currently working on. So it's the project's called the Yes Master Class, and the reason I decided to do it was because I've always had a career in sales, mostly over the telephone, and training. I have to say probably more than dozens, probably hundreds of people, right? All different industries, all different levels of education, from high school graduates to soccer moms to people with advanced degrees, right? How to sell, how to communicate effectively, right? When I started out on Wall Street, and most people can think back to like those, the movies, right? The movie versions of Wall Street, right? Like Michael Douglas, Charlie Sheen, right? With the phones, the Wolf of Wall Street, everybody's on the phone, trading places, right? Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd are running around like on the floor of the Mercantile Exchange. I think it's in Philadelphia at the time. And back then, no cell phones, right? No computers, right? No spreadsheets, right? It was just literally either face-to-face interaction or interaction with a phone, right? So the one interesting thing about the communication and the business of Wall Street and trading and finance, it seems like, I guess it's more exciting, right? Because those movies always have like extreme kind of like
The women, the
lifestyles.
cars, the mansions, the
Yeah,
drugs. Sometimes
and somebody's always looking to take advantage of somebody else, or somebody's always looking to rip somebody else off, and it just, I guess it's more entertaining. But the fact remains, right? For every Bernie Madoff there is, there's thousands of financial advisors and people in the investment world, that look to preserve the capital of their clients, right? And they do very, very well for their clients, over time, right?
I think it's interesting because you bring up the movies which do glorify some of these really terrible things. And in the Philippines, they see these things in movies and all they think is like, I don't want to be a salesperson. I don't want to be a sleazy salesman. Like, it has such a negative connotation that most people think sales is a bad thing, right? And you've worked on Wall Street where you were providing real, actual services to people that help them build their wealth and help them build their own incomes and everything else. You know, how is that stigma? How what would you tell somebody who says, no, sales is dirty, sales is bad, sales is scamming people? What would you tell them to really explain to them what you're really doing from not just in the brokerage world, but in the real sales world overall?
Yeah, within every organization, every company, whether it's a Fortune 500 company, a privately held company, or it's a nonprofit, there needs to be someone who initiates engagement in some way, right? It's extremely rare that there would be a company that, people, whether it's an executive or a consumer, just picks up the phone and calls up a company and says, hey, I really want your service. Sign me up today. Like it just doesn't happen. Maybe unless you pull up to the drive-thru when you want some lunch, right? I mean, other than that, that's about it. There's always a person or a team of people who need to do outreach to engage, right? So, of course, there's going to be companies that are unscrupulous, right? There's going to be terrible stories. But again, that pales in comparison to the companies, and let's say a medical device company, right, who's looking to help people with joint issues, right? With, who are, disabled in some way, right? But there are people who need to go out and reach out to those, hospitals and surgeons and doctors, specialist physicians group to say, hey, use our product. Here's why. Here's the value proposition, right? Like there's all communication. It's like the surgeon's just doing surgery, right? The patient needs to be helped, right? What has to come into play for that surgeon to say, hey, I'm replacing elbow and knee joints, right? Or I'm doing spinal disc fusion. What are the best supplies that I can get to help my patients to, get them back to 100%? And there's typically people who reach out, communicate with the surgeon in an effective way to sell that product. And it could apply to software, it could apply to insurance, it could apply to, loans and banking. It could be, any kind of product. It could be technology. It could be anything, right?
Right. So I want to aid you for a second. So when did you start getting into sales? Which with the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, or?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, had to be, my first job, this is kind of funny too. My first job was actually when I was 13 years old. So I've always, I've always like kind of been doing something, right? Always been working, always been industrious. But it's funny. The funny thing is though, I'm not the best student, not the best, completely distracted, no interest in being a student. And also, I wasn't necessarily like the most, like engineering, physics, like biology, like my eyes would just gloss over, right? Technology, I mean, forget it. So the only way I could really, provide any kind of value, right, to any company or any group of people that I was working with, or some people I was working for, was really by doing outreach and communicating effectively about the value proposition of the company I was currently working for, right, and how they can help your company to create efficiencies, how what we're doing can help your company to enhance the balance sheet, get ahead, do something good, or satisfy some kind of need that your company has to make it better, right? That was it.
So when you got to Wall Street, your first, your junior guy getting your stuff going there, what was your typical day like? Okay, I mean, you just pick up the phones. I mean, how many? What were you doing?
So I was
outbound.
I mean, so back then, no computers, just a phone, right? So you sit down at a desk and you have a phone, and you're at a desk bank with a bunch of other guys. And again, back then, it was mostly young guys who heard all these stories about millions of dollars that can be made on Wall Street, and you just sat down and they said, okay, the more dials you make, and the better that you become as a salesperson, well, the more likable you are, and the more persuasive you are, the more money you're going to make. So nobody was getting paid a salary, right? Nobody had a 401k, nobody had medical benefits, right? But you came to Wall Street, just solely with the intention of working hard to make money. All you had was your phone. And even
how many calls were you making a day?
Yeah, they would. I think it was like 500 calls a day or more, right? And it was a numbers game, right? So the way that you tracked your calls was, you'd have an index card and a pen or a pencil, and you would literally make hash marks, right? Every 4 hash marks, and then for your 5th call would go through the middle, and that's how you actually tracked your calls. And the way that your manager or supervisor would, how they would know how well you were doing is how many quality leads you would generate from making 500 calls a day, right? And if they looked at your card and you were making like 600 calls, but you were generating 1 lead, well, you know what? Those numbers really don't work, right? And you might have to go find another line of business.
We're talking about old school on an index card, just scratching it off, and then you manage actually looking back at that. In this day and age, it's kind of unthought of for some of these young kids because they have Salesforce, they have CRM, Zoho to the world.
The dynamic is completely foreign, and no one in today's world would ever do it for any reason. Right. I mean, you could almost liken it to sitting on a milk crate with a rotary dial phone with a cord, right, at a desk, and you have an index card, and you're just marking off every call you're making. It's like the definition of insanity to continue to do the same thing over and over again with, the same result of getting rejected. That's really what it was. And remember, with sales, right, rejection is part of it. You have to go into a sale, whether it's a live in-person presentation or picking up a phone to schedule a call or a meeting, or to actually sell someone something on a phone, that they're going to say no. Like
Right.
it's understood. Like nobody picks up the phone and somebody says, "Oh yeah, I was just thinking about that. Let me sign up," or "Yeah, I'll take a call. Yeah, why not?" Like it just doesn't happen. So
And just to circle back to the Philippine conversation, right? I think that's an interesting thing to bring up because you know in the Philippines there's such a sense as strong as a culture as they are. They've been through some of the worst typhoons, the poverty, the political situation, all sorts of challenges that happen there. When it comes to phone calls and sales, I think there's this fear of failure all the time. I don't think they've built that thick skin, I guess, to be rejected on the phone multiple times, and that really needs to be trained into them and an upfront conversation about it takes a lot of no's before you go anywhere. And
exactly.
but sometimes you strike gold, right?
But that's actually one of those mantras in sales, right? Every no gets you closer to a yes. So for like the seasoned or the chiseled salesperson's mind, yeah, I know people are going to say no to me today. Like, however many no's that is, right? 1, 2, 3, 50, 20, 100. But we know at some point, right? I'm going to hone my persuasive skills. I'm going to, communicate the value of what I am looking to market or sell effectively. And ultimately, someone's going to say yes, right? Whether
Yep.
that's 1 out of 10 times or 1 out of 100 times, it's going to happen. And when that happens, I am going to be paid for the result as the result of my effort.
Let's fast forward. You got into sales, kind of your whole life pretty much. And after as you got into the brokerage world, 500 calls a day, your manager is finally seeing you kind of maneuvering and getting better, making real solid leads. You know, Obviously we talk about how many no's it takes until your yeses start converting into real stuff. But I've heard stories of people making one-shot kills on the phone, right? And I think you told me a story of somebody, a young kid that was able to do that and kind of really make. I think he was just stuck in a situation, traveling, and he was able to really make a lot of money out of nowhere. Can you
Yeah,
compose
yeah.
that story real fast?
It was, again, an unbelievable story. And it's actually those stories that you hear that I actually got to experience firsthand, which is why, the allure of, Wall Street or the hedge fund or the trading business, is attractive to so many, young people, right, who want to just make it rich, right? So, and again, there's so many that don't. And there's so many, in the middle that just kind of grind it out until they find something else to do. Because again, you've got to really be mentally tough. Like I said, how many no's do you hear, right, before you get to the yes, right? And to your point with regard to the Filipino culture and all the people that we've worked with and trained and helped along the way, right? It's difficult to have a paradigm shift in culture and hearing a no and just moving on until you hear the yes and not letting it affect you emotionally or in any other way, right? So, to this kid, I'm pretty sure he was 19 at the time, right? He was from Australia and he was here on holiday. He was just traveling around the US and wherever else he was traveling from Australia, never been to, the US before, and he runs out of money, right? So now what does he do? Right? He's made friends. He's had a great time here. So I think he was like bartending or bar backing or working in a bar or restaurant. But obviously that wasn't enough money to like, live and, stay in a hotel or a hostel or rent or sleep on somebody's couch, right? And feed himself and then ultimately get back home. Like literally, like the kid said, he goes, I have no money. Like I can't even get like pay for my flight to get back home, right? So he had friends. He was a good kid, and but he had this Australian accent, which like, all right, Australian accent, working in a bar. And then he knew people that were in the brokerage business said, dude, like, come work, with us on the desk. And you never know, right? If you, get the right investor, make enough calls, whatever, you'll be able to earn enough commission to, stay here until whatever you want, or make enough money within like a few weeks or a few months to, get your plane ticket and go back home. I don't remember how much the plane ticket was, but I think to travel from the U.S. to Australia at the time was probably like, I don't know, 1,000 or 1,600 or 1,800 bucks, something like that. But again, the kid partied, came here to have a good time. He was on vacation, and he had no money. literally within, I'm pretty sure it was like, I want to say like within 4 months. It was a relatively short period of time, less than 6 months. He lands an investor, and the person wasn't even necessarily an investor. He was a farmer up in Washington State, and the kid just happened to call him up. Again, we were just calling business owners, who likely would have an interest in investing in the stock market, right? A hot tip, whatever it might be. So the farmer said, you know what? He said, I have all these Starbucks certificates. He said, I'm not sure what to do with them. He says, can I send them over to you and you can figure out how much they're worth and what we can do with them? So it turns out that this farmer was a dairy farmer and he supplied milk to Starbucks. And everybody knows, Starbucks is on every corner in every city and every town. But at the time, this is back in like the late 90s, Starbucks was just getting started. And this farmer, I guess, he just thought he was supplying milk. Starbucks was paying him not only in cash, but in stock certificates. And of course, Starbucks stock went from like, $20 to like, I don't know, 150, $200. So sure enough, the farmer sends the kid like, I don't know, millions of dollars in Starbucks stock. And the kid, sold it, bought Microsoft or something else, right? But just given this pure dollar amount, right? Just the commissions that he generated from selling the stock and then from buying, another stock. I'm pretty sure the number was within like, I don't know, after the 4 months that he was there or in a short period of time, he made like $400,000 for himself.
Right. And this you're talking about 25, 30 years ago, right? $400,000,
this is like,
30 years ago.
It's like 1997 or 1998.
Right. Right. And what's really interesting is, you bring up the word commissions a lot, and it's so different than what the Philippine structure, especially the virtual assistant world, is used to. Because we have, obviously, Philippines is call center central, right? For the world. You have us in India, and we talk about so much about, oh, you're hired at a call center and you're doing sales, but you're only getting paid your hourly rate. And maybe there's some sort of bonus structure, whatever else. But for the most part, no Filipino companies are really offering, or sorry, very few Filipino companies or US companies are really offering 100% commission jobs in the Philippines. And most Filipinos are so scared of those positions because they want stability, they want some sort of hourly rate, that they forget to look at the possibility of exponentially larger income for themselves and for their families when you look at that risk. And I think a lot of Filipinos are so scared to take on the risk for themselves, or maybe it's just a lack of self-confidence. But what would you tell somebody that's looking at these positions? Because most sales jobs, as you know, have a commissionable structure, usually, if not pure commission, some sort of lower base but a higher end commission structure. What would you tell some of these Filipino VAs that may consider this but are really scared to look at that not purely guaranteed salary?
Again, I'm going to try to focus, solely on like Filipino, VAs working in, the call center, the help desk world, right? The hyper support type world. But I say, just in general, people in general, everybody's DNA is different, right? People have an aversion to risk, or, again, they're not going to work solely on pure commission because they're not confident enough in themselves and comfortable enough that they're going to get somebody to say yes. But for anybody, and again, you think about the Filipino workforce, right? Everyone is solely, communicating, whether it's on the phones, right, help desk, whatever it might be. If you have, and from what also we've come to know from the people that we work with, they always have a number of different, jobs or side hustles, right? They're always doing 2 or 3 things or 4 things at one time to try to make ends meet, right? So if they have, 1 or 2, jobs where they're getting the regular income that they can cover and pay their bills, right, and anything that they need to cover in their regular everyday lives, dedicate or commit to a number of hours a week, right? And, roll the dice a little bit, take a risk, right? Apply the skills that you've honed to communicate, with other business people, right? To earn some more money for yourself, because the money that you'll earn from a commission-based sales or marketing job is exponentially greater, right, than the hourly rate that you're going to make, right?
Yep.
And then, again, it doesn't happen it doesn't happen overnight, right? As we all know, right? Nobody walks in, picks up a phone, and all of a sudden someone pays you exponentially more than you are currently making. It just doesn't happen. Even in the case of the Australian kid that I previously worked with, right? It took, again, 4 months, whatever it is, 8 weeks, well, actually 14, 16 weeks, but again, in a very small window of time, right? He basically changed his life. Not only changed his fortune, right? Was able to make it home, but he changed his life, right? And literally, the funny thing is that after that happened, he didn't stay on Wall Street. He didn't stay in the financial business. He left. He said,
right.
"How it's not going to get any better than this. Like, this is what people spend years, working towards, and this happened to me within a few months. That's it. I'm out of here."
That's what it's interesting because so this actually is a good segue. So let's but before I go to this next step, I do want to say there's a difference between the sales that and the projects you and I have worked on together, obviously, than what other people may perceive as sales, right? And different kinds of sales roles. We identify sales in my company as anything from lead generation to getting appointments to closing deals, but really it's the ability to convince someone to do something that and educate them on a product or a service, right? And then try to get them to actually spend money on it. But we only do, and you only do B2B, not B2C. And I think it's important for people to understand what the difference here is. We're talking about B2B. B2C is business to consumer. We're not calling people's homes at 4 o'clock in the evening. We're not doing any of that kind of stuff while they're having dinner with their family or playing with their kids. We focus in the projects you and I have worked on together on really the B2B businesses, B2B sales, business to business sales. We're reaching out to high level executives of companies to often offer them a service from one of our clients that we know they can benefit from. And I think that's a big difference in how we're training our team members and other people that you've trained for me in the past, because B2B sales versus B2B sales is just two different universes, right? There's a certain amount of respect in B2B sales. There's a certain amount of politeness that even the people you're cold calling have towards you. They're usually not rude. They're usually not going to curse you out. They usually have a certain politeness about them. And it's just a different world. So I just want to make sure we preface this next part with the idea of we're talking about B2B sales on our end of things, at least, right?
Well, at the end of the day, right, regardless of whether it's B2C or B2B, right, it's all about trust, likability, and persuasiveness. And also, you have to believe in the value that you're looking to create for the person on the other end of the phone, right? So even in the case of B2B, as we're talking about, the one thing, and again, here's where the cultural paradigm shift, right, with the Filipino workforce comes into play with U.S. business owners and executives and the C-suite, is that business decision makers at the companies, they actually need to be communicated in a very effective, very time efficient way, almost the same way that they would delegate responsibility to their colleagues, to their employees, and also the way their peers would communicate with them to get things done, right? Clear, effective, and a succinct way, right? So another paradigm shift, right? Same thing with, so somebody's in the Philippines, right? Completely different, dynamic, from, someone being in like, an office park in Chicago or a high rise in Manhattan, right? You're calling them up, but they have to speak to them in the same way as if they're the peer, right? It's professional, polite, positive, but in that 60-second or 45-second window, if they can express and communicate to that executive that they're going to be able to create value for them, that executive is going to agree to the next step of whatever the process is to learn more about that product or service.
And that's so important because you talk a lot about self-confidence and the confidence in themselves to take on a commission-based only job. We're talking about looking at themselves as peers to these people that they're calling. Philippine culture doesn't teach that. unfortunately, I hate to say it, being Filipino myself, you know, one of the first things you teach our team is if you say ma'am or sir to me, on this call, it's over.
Yeah,
We don't
right.
call each other sir. We don't call each other ma'am. We're peers. We're peers. And it's almost like we have to train that out of individuals going onto these roles because if you start off a sales call and you're already in a submissive, subservient role, your advantage is basically you're giving them the advantage in the call, right? You're
Even
automatically saying you don't belong there.
even Mr. or Miss is kind of frowned
Right,
upon or just ineffective. It just doesn't work.
right. But to that point of being like of no confidence and and not really feeling peer to peer, we hired a team in Cebu. We had a team of people in Cebu, and they were working for a large U.S. electronics manufacturer, and they were, I'm going to put this in quotes, the salespeople for the company. When we got to the nitty gritty of their sales, as you were training them, you realized their sales guidance was a binder of scripts, and they were
It
not
was
allowed to leave the script at all.
it was so refining and confining, like just to for a company to think that they could provide like these strict parameters, right, and scripts to people and not allow them to deviate and use any creativity, within the course of a conversation with anyone. It's mind-boggling to me. It just makes no sense.
Because that's not sales. That's not sales. Sales, especially in cold calls, is how much of that is your gut and feeling the conversation and feeling how it's going. No binder can give you that script of, oh, the guy said, or I saw his face and he had this facial. Like you have to rely a lot on what's happening in the conversation. That how could you possibly rely on a binder to give you script by script, line by line rebuttal and be recorded every single time. And if you deviate from it, you could get fired because they were that
Right.
strict. Like,
Yeah, I mean,
how is that sales at all?
yeah, I mean, it's almost like it's almost like the definition of insanity. I mean, you're almost like, you're destined to fail. Like they're setting you up to
Right,
fail. How they can expect anybody to succeed and to continue in that role, it makes no sense. So,
right,
and again, so that's, one of the reasons for starting the Yes Masterclass, right, was to, allow people to have that creativity. Because at the end of the day,
right.
right, you know the formula for success that that I've put together over the years, it can apply to anyone, any kind of business, and anyone in particular, but they really just have to be themselves, right? That's really what it comes down to.
But it was so great because even with that team in Cebu that we had, right? Once you trained them and gave them the ability to do it, I thought they were fantastic. Like, how great were they? Right? They had full leeway to do it their way with some guidance by you, but they were personable, they were friendly, they were aggressive without being rude, and they were able to actually get the job done. You just had to let them do it.
And they were energized to have conversations and dialogue, with executives, right, and business owners, and to
Right.
get a
And
positive
essentially,
response.
and I remember reaching out to their executives, sorry, to their management at one point, trying to figure out why they're not doing sales the way you and I would define sales to be in the Philippines. And the answer was, well, they're not smart enough. Filipinos are not smart or talented enough to do sales. But with just a little bit of guidance, and also just giving them the freedom to be themselves, what makes them incapable of doing it,
Listen, to
right?
for a company or a manager or a supervisor to assume that kind of inadequacy, and blanket it across, a general group of people is absolutely ridiculous, and it's a complete falsehood. I mean, like,
Right.
and as you know, right? So I've trained people with, high school degree. You're just, looking for a job, put their head down, work hard, give them the formula for success, and, over practice, and they improve, they'll do fine. What about we had a group of stay-at-home moms, right?
Yeah.
On the telepromoting team that was working for us, right? I mean, they didn't do sales. They were teachers, right? They were nurses. They were, homemakers, right? And, they did great, using the formula, right?
Yep.
They were
And
friendly, they
what's
were
interesting,
personable, they were professional, and they did fine.
so let's talk about the formula a little bit, and where that's leading to. So months ago, a year ago now, maybe a little bit longer, you had approached me about an article that you saw that really kind of took things and stuff. So can you talk to me about that and how and what that's leading up to now?
Right, right. So that was, I want to say that was the summer of, I want to say it was like I think July of 2024, and artificial intelligence, or AI, was becoming very, very popular and mainstream, and you couldn't, put the TV on, or you couldn't, pull up the internet or look at your phone and not hear something about AI. And I just happened, I don't even know what AI is. I didn't know what it was. But then I saw an article that said in India, right, which is one of like the call center and help desk, I guess, the foundations of the world, right, globally, right? They said they're laying off, companies are laying off like hundreds of thousands of people at a clip because of AI. And I'm scratching my head saying, like, how can you do that to so many people? Is the AI really that effective, right? Is it really working? Like, what is it doing? Like, we don't even know what it is. It's not even like tested yet, right? And the amazing thing is, right? So I know you and I have a relationship with a VC, and we're on the call with the VC, and we kind of got into this, kind of AI conversation, and he imparted
Just for our leaders, for our listeners, VC being the venture capitalists, people who put money and fund other companies and products to grow. Okay, Chris.
The venture capitalist we were speaking with, who's top of the food chain in venture capital, brilliant guy. He was explaining to us that there was a large, I think it was a software computer company in the U.S. that purchased AI software for like $1 billion or more, only because they had a 1.6% better engagement rate from a customer or consumer that was calling in about, whatever they were calling about. They needed help with something. And because the engagement rate was 1.6% better than with their current call center workforce, that was like the catalyst or the impetus for them to buy this AI software.
Right.
And I said to myself, I mean, I could have taught the people at the help desk to have a much better engagement rate than 1.67%. Upon speaking with an executive or a customer of the product that the company is, looking to improve, and
Right.
it blew my mind. So I couple that with hundreds of thousands of people are laid off, right, because of artificial intelligence. And I said to myself, there's all these Filipino people that we've come to know and have worked for us and we've helped, and in a number of different ways, and they're just great people. I said, there's got to be even more, right, outside of our little microcosm and our little community, that could use help or use my help or my formula in developing a skill set that can help them to differentiate from the rest of the call center and help desk workforce, and perhaps help them to keep their job or become more effective, or be more valuable to their company, so that they'll keep their job, or they can go out and get an even better job, right, to improve their lives, whatever altruistic intentions they may have to work upon that, provide a better life for themselves, their friends, their family, communities, whatever. But it's almost like the anti-AI, right, campaign, right? Let's teach people how to improve their their communication effectively with business owners and executives and the C-suite, right, to generate greater compensation for themselves and provide value for the company, for the companies that they're working with as well.
Yeah. So I remember when you and I went down this train of thought, we really looked at a bunch of other, I guess, training companies in the Philippines who will teach you customer service skills, how to handle a call center work, some software skills, some soft skills. And I actually thought one of the fascinating things was these companies are teaching you linguistic skills, which didn't make sense to me because I've seen recordings of them, and they're basically Filipinos with very strong accents that have not worked with US companies or have not interacted with US executives before. And these same Filipinos are teaching you the linguistic skills of English and Americans, and it didn't make sense to me at all. So when you and I were
That
really
doesn't make any sense.
formulating, right? But you know, when you talk about that, you're talking about this article you saw with AI replacing call center work and customer service work. It really led to the conversation of what you're really instructing and teaching now, which is the Yes Master class, right? A program to really bring a different level of training. And I'll be honest, the iterations that we've done, it's real sales training. It's real sales skills.
Yeah, it's just effective, persuasive communication in a phone booth. I mean, again, most calls shouldn't be more than 60 seconds, right? 60 seconds or less, right? Gain trust, create value, and get someone to say yes. That's it. It sounds very simple. I mean, but it requires practice and a little bit of training. And the more determined you are to stick with the formula, the more successful you're going to be not only in your professional life, but you'll also become more assertive in your personal life as well. There's no cost involved in this. I mean, just working with so many Filipino people from the help desk and from the call center world, these are skills that they need to know. This is like the MBA or the PhD of phone marketing, phone sales, phone skills. And what I really want to do is just help people to either keep the position that they have, create value for their companies, maybe get a promotion, maybe get a little bit more money, and also maybe take that risk and roll the dice, because now that they have these skills, they can take the sales skills that I'll share with them, and they can go and they can exponentially generate more income for themselves and their families, and in a different way, right? That's a little bit more dynamic and maybe has more risk, right? Associated with than what they're currently doing.
And as we get to more details for the next Yes Master class, we'll put it down in the comments here of this podcast and this episode. So we'll definitely push that out more. Chris, speed round. I got a couple quick questions for you. Just give me some real quick answers. Ready? Do you think sales is for everyone?
Sales is not for everyone, but anyone can be trained to be a great salesperson.
Okay. Do you think sales is an important component of everything else?
Again, I think I alluded to this earlier, right? There's always a person or a team of people, right, who their sole focus and responsibility is engagement, right? New business, a handshake, a phone call, an email, a text, whatever it might be, to open that door to generate new business opportunities for their companies. And again, and I might be digressing a little bit of this may be part two to answer your question. Nowadays, and the reason that the emphasis is really on people in the Philippines who their careers are based on help desk, customer service, phone marketing, right, if you will, or phone communication. Nobody here, or almost nobody here in the US, is doing this. Younger people, older people, professional people, everybody either relies on an email or some other form of communication, which I don't even know what it is, but literally nobody would do it.
So I want to lead you down a question here, because I do want to bring up another comment before we close out this episode. If there's a VA in the Philippines and they're saying, I never really want to do sales, I just want to be VA, I just want to get clients, I just want to do my job and everything else, do they need to have sales skills?
I think they go, engagement, whether you relate, whether you call it sales or you call it engagement or you call it, earning or gaining trust and likability within a short period of time, that's sales. Because if somebody trusts you and they like you, right, whatever you're looking to present to them or whatever proposition you have for them or whatever value you're looking to create for them in their business, they're going to give you a shot, right? So the better you are at sales or being persuasive and getting someone to say yes, to agree to learning more about what you're looking to accomplish, I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I don't think people that are in the VA world today or trying to get into the VA world today think they're salespeople. But how the hell you think you're going to go out and get clients? You're going to go on Upwork and apply for 5,000 jobs on Fiverr and apply for all these jobs. The person finally gets you on the phone or gets you into a Zoom meeting. You have to pitch them. You have to present yourself. You have to do sales. And then let's say you get hired and you want to increase your role. You have to sell again to your client. And then even further, even if you're not doing sales as your job, if you want a raise, if you want to, increase responsibility, if you want people to work under you one day, you still have to sell yourself through the entire process. And I don't think VAs consider themselves salespeople for the most part, unless that's your specific role. But so much of being an independent VA or even just being on the job hunt for an agency is sales. So I think the skills you're teaching within the Yes Master class is so valuable. The VAs really need to look at this as, as an industry, the communication needs to be better. If you're talking to executives as your clients, if you're talking to executives as part of your job, if you're talking to executives overall because you want to start your own agency or start your own group of people to work for you, you need to be better at communications. And that's sales, man. That to me is like the epitome of sales.
And not only that, it's not just, when you say communication, right? It's also the listening is incredibly important as well. If you don't listen correctly and process, right, what the executive is saying to you or not saying to you, right, how will you be able to effectively reply, right, or pivot, right? Pivot, change things up a little bit, right, to re-engage, get the executive's attention, right, persuade them to continue a dialogue with you and your current company, right? So the listening is equally, I would say equally, if not more important, right? And as you mentioned, I think you mentioned, right, like when you're speaking to somebody, right, you can't just have the same formula, the same script, say the same thing in the same, monotone way, right? Like, one size does not fit all, right? So and the only way that you kind of get a better understanding of the demeanor of the executive that you're speaking with at the time, then you have to be able to discern this within seconds, right? Is not really so much by speaking, but by listening, right? The first response that you get will determine, right, the next thing you say, and not just what you say, but what you say, when you say it, and how you say it. Is
interesting.
So important.
There's so much of what you teach me and what you teach your batch in these Yes Master classes that I mentioned a lot about these subreddits and these other forums online that I actually listen to VAs complaining about their jobs or talking about their next role. So many of them could really just benefit from having somebody help them, train them in listening, communicating, treating yourself as a peer, being confident, and negotiating. Like I feel like these are just regular skills that if you really want to become a VA, and let's be honest, being a VA is really being an independent contractor, running your own little mini ecosystem of your own company, right? Which means you're running everything in that system. And most of which, in some of these complaints that I see on these forums, could be fixed very quickly with just better communications, better sales skills, better people skills, and everything else. I want to wrap up this podcast. I'm sure we'll have future episodes with you on it because I know there's a lot of stuff we can keep talking about. Last question for you. One piece of advice for a VA looking to get into sales, just considering the possibility of going into a sales role. What's one piece of advice you would give them?
The one piece of advice would be just, be true to yourself, always, be yourself. Don't try to be something that you're not. And, once you have a blueprint, right, a sales process that is successful, right, and the process is proven, just practice. I mean, it's a lot of hard work. As far as the Yes Master class formula, it's probably, I haven't quantified it, but I don't know, in a few hours or maybe 2 or 3 weeks of, classes, online classes here and there, those are all the tools that you would need to succeed at sales. But what you really need to succeed at sales is believing in yourself and practicing until you perfect the process.
Awesome. So Chris, thank you so much. We'll definitely have you on again in a future episode. For all of our listeners, we will have some more details about the Yes Master class. Chris Borgese will be your instructor. This is, Chris is the founder and the head instructor for the Yes Master class. So if you really want to be able to interact and learn more from Chris directly, a real expert in the field of sales and business development, I encourage you all to sign up for the Yes Master class, and we'll have more details about that as we find them out. Chris, thank you again for joining us on the Offshore Diaries. We will talk to you again soon. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you at the next episode. Bye.
Paulo, my pleasure. Thanks.